Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Coffee Podcast, your weekly blend of motivation, encouragement, education, and insight into all things medicine for junior doctors and medical students in South Africa. Welcome to episode 11. Just as last week's episode was primarily for medical students preparing to begin their mandatory 2 years of internship training, this week's episode focuses on the next level of junior doctor years with conversation and reflection on community service. I was privileged to spend time with Dr. Naeem Vallee. Dr. Naeem is well loved by his colleagues, seniors, and students alike, and well known for his use of fountain pens in his clerking notes and impressive skills as a barista and coffee connoisseur, when he's not hard at work serving patients and people at Hani Baragwanath Academic Hospital, where he is currently completing his community service year. Although internship and community service journeys are as unique as the doctors who take them, I think you'll find that there's a lot to draw from our conversation and some profound thoughts that can become really actionable and practical things to take into your own workday and future career. If you've been missing our regular Coffee with Consultants feature, don't dismay, as next week's episode will see the return of specialist consultants sharing their path in medicine and the decision algorithm that led to them choosing their specific subspec or discipline. For now though, before we dive in, I'd like to quickly thank our sponsors for this episode. Our first sponsor on the Dr. Coffee podcast, I'm pleased to introduce you to FlashMed. FlashMed is a new type of medical study flashcards pre-packaged and formatted to assist you to be more effective as a student and ultimately help you to become a better doctor. Comprising pharmacology revision flashcards, clerking sheets, muscle anatomy flashcards, and revision notes, amongst others, FlashMed products are printed using the highest quality paper, and each set consists of 50 flashcards or pages. You can find FlashMed on Instagram at @FlashMedSA and order direct from them via DM with nationwide delivery. For this and other episodes, I'm also pleased and proud to announce our partnership with WardWorks. WardWorks is a free patient list and task management app that allows doctors to simplify the way they work. Join the hundreds, if not thousands, of South African doctors who are using WardWorks to keep track of and easily access patients' information, location, and ward work. There's a reason that more than 250,000 tasks have been completed using WardWorks in less than 2 years. WardWorks is a web-based app that can be accessed through your internet browser on mobile or desktop simply by visiting wardworks.app. But most convenient of all is to find the downloadable applications on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. You'll also find some very useful perks to using WardWorks, that's PERX, such as discounts on scrubs and stethoscopes and other cool stuff that makes being a dogatela that much more rewarding. Thanks again to our sponsors. And now back to this week's episode, and without any further ado, here is Dr. Naeem Vallee. Welcome to the Dr. Coffee Podcast, Dr. Naeem Vallee.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for having me, because I'm here in your beautiful home, and you've made some delicious coffee for me, and I must say to the listeners, you are actually the original Dr. Coffee.
Well, only if you insist.
With your barista skills and your knowledge of coffee. And we'll also delve into your love of fine pens and calligraphy. But it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And we, just for the benefit of the audience, we met when I was starting my 5th year in medical school and was doing internal medicine at Bara. And you at the time were a first-year intern.
First-year intern, and I was doing internal med at that time, which is what you're doing now.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of like synergy and overlap. It's great. So with all my guests, I start off by asking where you graduated medical school from.
Sure.
And where you did your junior time. So let's lead with that.
So I graduated in 2019 from Wits University, and I did my 2 years of internship at Hani Baragwanath. Well, I'm still currently there doing my ComServe.
Yeah, so we know that you're Witsy and you did your intern time at Bara. Did you choose Bara?
I did.
And why? What, of all places?
Well, I think the exact reason is quite silly, but nonetheless, it was a very strong motivating factor. I have a very good friend who's a quite senior medical registrar now, and at the time was doing ComServe, and he was doing ComServe at Klerksdorp. But he was running the ICU and doing internal medicine, and he was so clinically confident, and he was so just impressive in his doctoring that sort of led me to choose Baragwanath, which is where he did it, and he was so insistent that it was a good foundation and somewhere that you learn and grow as a young doctor, that it attracted me instantly to it.
I see. So you had admired his skill and said, if I want to get exposure to the same sort of things and same training he did, I need to go where he did. I like that. But now, Bara is a very busy place. It's a difficult place to do internship for many. Mm-hmm. Why would you subject yourself to another year by doing ComServe as well?
Well, that was an act of madness and wasn't entirely intentional, but ended up being something that I needed to do out of personal reason.
Okay.
But regardless of it all, I knew the challenge I was getting into, and I wasn't blindsided by the fact that I was staying in Gauteng. I knew that it would be difficult nonetheless. But I went in prepared, which is a huge factor in ComService, is being prepared to do anything and being prepared to change your perspective on things. And whether you're fixed or not in your future goals or not, that's great to be and great to have a trajectory. But if you aren't certain, ComService and your medical officer time can be an immense foundation to change your career path or change your own trajectory in a way that suits you. So internship will give you a good foundation, but these years of ComService, and especially your first or second year of medical office time, can really help you do or gear yourself towards what you really want to do.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying there about like charting a course and making decisions now with your future in mind. You have mentioned to me that you had certain interests and what you wanted to specialize in. Has that changed, or how did that go about?
Well, I ended off medical school doing student internship, and I did that in internal medicine. And then I started off my internship time when I met you in internal medicine at Bara. And I did it pre-COVID, so I had the full craziness of walking around doing 20,000 steps, 16 kilometers a day, managing 50 patients. And I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. Even the nights where I came home 11 o'clock on a normal night or 8 p.m. every night for a month, that was something I took in my stride. And I thought that internal med was what I wanted to do. But me being me, and I know not everyone is me, that's impossible, but using my hands is something that is, I love, whether it's making coffee or using, as you said, my fancy pens. Getting involved with my hands is something that's at my core part of my identity.
Yes.
And when I progressed through internship and did more surgical rotations, those are the rotations that really drew me into their practical skills and into using both my medical knowledge and practical skill and combining those two worlds. So I think it transitioned slowly from medicine, internal medicine, to something more surgical.
Sure.
I don't know what that is yet, and I want a bit more exposure and everything, but we'll see. And I definitely think there's an end goal somewhere, but we'll see. But it's definitely something surgical.
Do you feel that the exposure, because you're speaking now about being exposed as an intern, that helps you to shape your decisions, do you think that the exposure you get as a student is an accurate reflection of what the specialities actually cover? Or do you think it's more about just teaching the content and then you really get exposed to it at intern level? Is it a bit of both? Because I always say to people that as a medical student, your exposure is almost like knowing what's on the menu, and you know that there's beef, fish, chicken, or vegetarian options, but you don't know how the dish is seasoned, and you don't know what the portion size is and what the cost is, and you only really get to see that at internship. However, I have known people who literally from day one of med school have been like, this is what I want to do, and they're steadfast in their goal, and you see them 8 years later and they're there.
Well, I mean, that registrar that I mentioned earlier that sort of inspired me to choose Baragwanath, he knew that he wanted to do internal medicine, worked extremely hard in his internship, in his ComService, did all of his courses, wrote his primaries, and the minute he started his medical officer time, in fact, he didn't start his medical officer time, he went straight into his reg time in medicine. So he had a clear-cut path and was absolutely steadfast in that, which is brilliant. He had the goal. For me, who was a bit more confused about the whole situation, I think exploring it's at the core of trying to find yourself. That's exploration in a nutshell. And as you mentioned, it's true, in particular hospitals where you have better exposure or some exposure. For example, Baragwanath, you might not see the in and out of subspec, say for example, renal or hematology or endocrine, and you do general medicine throughout it all. You have a great idea and concept of managing a general medical patient. But you might be very narrow in your exposure to heme or renal in a clinical setting.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you move yourself towards, say, Joburg Gen, where you do subspecs, then you're very much more comfortable in onc or heme or whatever it really is. So I can't really say, because internship where I did it, we had great exposure to specific things. For example, if you do trauma,
Yes.
you have amazing trauma experience.
Yeah, the trauma at Bara is legendary.
It's legendary, yeah.
Everyone who does it, they have world-class exposure.
Exactly. But the way that our internship year was set, I only did trauma. So I didn't see a single appendicitis in my surgery time.
Oh, wow.
In fact, I saw all of my appendicitises that I've seen in ped surgery. So,
wow.
yeah, so I know how to manage that from a kid, I'll tell you that. But ped surgery, that's comm service stuff. Internship, it depends really. I think having done my student time through the Wits circuit and being exposed to Joburg Gen, I know, for example, that obs and gynae is pretty standard between the two. You have good exposure between both Bara and Charlotte. There's this a similar exposure. And though the patient load and emergency list might be long at Baragwanath, the end point of learning is quite similar. You still come out with 10 Caesars, and you still have assisted in how many ever deliveries, and you are confident in listen to your podcast this morning in your tocolysis regime, and so you gain good exposure. Things like orthos, you don't actually, in Baragwanath, for example, don't get any or much theatre time at all. So you can, for example, if you're interested, go to theatre and see whatever operation happening. But that actual theatre time as an intern is quite missed.
Yes.
And that's quite fair to be expected in any surgical environment that you're in, especially as a junior.
Yeah, because there has to be a point where you say, look, you are the junior. We need somebody to book scans. It's not going to be the consultant.
Yeah. It's it's a harsh reality, but you end up managing the patient in ward.
Yes.
And you see their progression from acute management when they arrive at casualty right until they're discharged with the screws in their leg or the X-fix in situ, and then you can see them leave happily and come back in clinic and manage them that way. And that's wonderful as an intern to see that progression. But the nitty-gritty details sometimes may be missed. And why I said earlier about comm service being a great place to explore, specifically in something like surgery, is that you immediately become a bit more involved. For example, you know the story of obs and gynae, 10 Caesars, and sometimes if you like, you'll do more. This year, I started off in ped surgery, and I assisted in theatre and got it to be quite practical. It was wonderful. But I have now subsequently moved to obs and gynae, and as a comm servant in obs and gynae, they treat you as part of the senior roster, or they put you on the senior roster. So,
which is different to Charlotte, because at Charlotte, if you're a comm serve in obs and gynae, you do intern calls. So it's like it's complete opposite.
Yeah. So like I did a month of intern calls, and then cut with the consultant. I had to do, I think, 10 Caesars with the consultant for them to ascertain my confidence in theatre. And then from there, they left me in theatre. And now...
With the fifth year to assist.
With the fifth year to assist, it happens. And it's wonderful. And it's very scary. But that being not... I can't really say thrown in the deep end because you've been exposed, but...
There's still supervision. Like
exactly.
There's still, if something goes wrong, there's still a consultant on call.
Oh, there's still a consultant, there's still a senior reg, I can call whenever. But it builds your confidence to be there to handle the instruments, and Caesars are quite nice. You just do your routine things, and when there's more difficult, you can call for help, and once you've encountered enough difficult cases, you're confident to manage that. I think in the last 3 months or 2 months, I've done 110-20 Caesars.
That's epic. I love that.
Yeah,
that's tremendous.
And this is the thing of what it is to be a comm serve there. Say for example, versus somewhere else in the periphery, is that every call there's at least a minimum of 10 to 20 Caesars being done.
Yeah.
And
you do that in one call, what some interns do in 3 months.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think 2 calls ago, I did 10 Caesars in one night. It was wonderful. And the intern was assisting with me. They cut a few, but they were already done with their 10. They were moving to gynae, and they said, you did this evening, we did my whole logbook.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful. I mean, the fact that you can gain that confidence.
Yeah.
If I didn't have any exposure to surgery or to obs and gynae, which is also one thing I said I'd never do after leaving it in ComServe. I mean, in internship.
Yeah.
So I'll never come
Most
back.
people close the book of that, right? Okay, I've done my time.
But it's been wonderful, and I really
Yeah.
enjoyed my time there. And I'm actually have elected to stay in obs and gynae till the end of the year, just because I wanted a bit more time in theatre, and
Yes.
I sort of craved that furthering of the dexterity and using my surgical skills.
I love that, because as junior doctors, we need to step up and take initiative for our own learning. There's very few times in your life when you're going to be supervised, and I don't want to say mollycoddled, but somebody supporting you along the way so much as they do in internship. And yet there's still this kind of hesitancy, this reluctance to take responsibility. That's the time to step up and say, can I do more than the logbook? You're not just the minimum requirements. And at certain centres, like you say, the exposure is going to be excellent. So I think another key there is to think where you are and look around where you are and say, what is it that makes this place special that I can maximize my training? Because somebody down the line is going to say, oh, wow, you were at this hospital. You must have been exposed to this wonderful stuff. And that's going to shape you as a doctor. It's going to make you a better doctor.
Exactly. And it's exactly that no one is going to guide you or walk you down your own career path. That's the path you have to walk down. And whether you meander and get to your end goal late in your 30s, or if you started early in your 20s, or whether you get there at 31 and a top fellow at the age of 35, no one's going to do that for you. You have to really cut your way through and make your own path. And I think it's obviously not as isolated or lonely as that. You have your colleagues and you have your seniors to help you through the way, and that's also the importance of having a mentor, especially in medicine or in a career that's this long, that'll see you till the end of your days, if you choose to stay in clinical medicine. And that's one of the wonderful things that you can get in somewhere like Baragwanath. For example, there's consultants that I can call, even though I haven't worked with them in years, and ask them for a bit of advice, or just ask them to chat. And if I see them in the corridors, they'll grab a coffee with me, even though I'll do something completely unrelated to that specific department that we worked in together. For example, in the beginning of the year, I had a wonderful consultant in pediatric surgery, and he's been quite instrumental in my view of looking forward in pursuing surgery. Call me up regularly.
You can mention names.
Oh, okay. Well, shout out to Nirav. Dr. Patel, he's been quite instrumental in like my own personal journey. Yeah. And he's constantly there, and he'll remind me to like pursue and give my all. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's weird. It's a profession, but it's also sort of a life that you lead. Like it's something that if you give your all, it is as rewarding to do. Then I don't know. It's
a ministry. It's a ministry. It's a calling. And also, I think what you're alluding to is that medicine, as much as people might think it's a big field or it's a big profession, it's still quite small. Correct. There's a limited number of places at medical schools every year. There are a limited number of reg posts. There are a limited number of places at public and private hospitals to work at. And so within medicine, if you make those connections, those can be lifelong connections. Those can be connections that last. And very much a part of where you go in medicine is your network, your exposure to people, to places, and who says to you, hey, Naeem, I need you to come and you should do this. Like that doctor that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast who, because of his example, said to you, I want to go to Bara. And then that's opened up new connections with consultants and senior regs and taking you down a new career path. So we're at that time of the year now. Like I just recorded a podcast for those who are going into internship. And a previous episode was about how to apply and the whole process online. But we're now at the stage of the year where the second year interns are looking towards their community service year.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I can ask you for some of the brass tacks, nuts and bolts stuff, the
Sure.
process of how to apply for community service.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some sense, applying for community service, certainly for me, if I think about it, is more nerve-wracking than applying for internship.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be
Correct.
an MO, right? You're going to have an MP number.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take on much more responsibility, and you're going to also potentially be placed in hospitals with far less supervision than you used to.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that process. You can start wherever you choose.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the essential nitty-gritty of applying is very similar to applying for internship in terms of the technicality of the website and
Okay.
the ICSP, and that your podcast was excellent about that. But the difference in internship and community services, as you said, that wherever you get placed and you're the one of two doctors working, you will be in charge of managing something that you may not be comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
So that also comes back to the networking, etc. But regardless, there's many ways and many methods to do these things, and I can't give you the best way.
Sure.
It's just something that can help our second years and our listeners
Yes.
to sort of gear themselves to think about it.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to also ask you questions as you explain, not to interrupt you, but so that because I don't know how this works.
Sure.
So I'm actually doing this podcast for me. This is so I can.
Cool.
But I'm going to interrupt you because I want to clarify and kind of just get some of the nuance as well. You have mentioned it's the same process, but the first thought that popped into my mind was, are the same hospitals that you do internship available for ComServe? And are there some hospitals where you'll do ComServe where there'll be 0 interns? That's
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, good question. So, there are some centers that offer internship posts that will offer community service posts. So, for example, Baragwanath, Joburg Gen do offer community service posts, but the number of posts available is significantly lower than what it is for your interns.
Okay.
For example, Baragwanath in my year offered, I think, 90 to 100 posts for interns, but we consistently offer 8 posts at Baragwanath.
8.
8 posts.
Wow. Okay,
And
that's significantly less.
Yes, and even in that in the departments that you may work in these community service years, you may not have interns. So even though I'm doing obs and gynae now and have interns, when I worked in ped surge, I was the junior, which is fine, but it means you don't have any interns to go, so you will work as an intern, as a medical officer.
Is there ever a time that, as a ComServe doctor, if you have to fill that role as the junior on the team, do you feel that people will speak to you and treat you like an intern, or will they know that you're ComServe? So you don't. What I'm saying is that you don't ever feel disgruntled about doing the intern role.
No, not really. It's weird. For example, I'll tell you this. Even though you have to do all the intern stuff, running the bloods, booking the scans, etc., when you are with the other juniors who are doing that, even though they might be a general surgery registrar and they're doing the same things as you, that sort of teamwork, especially I'm just being swayed by my time in ped surge and the teamwork and the established good teamwork
There's
and
a good
repertoire.
culture.
Yeah, it's a good culture.
I think the important thing is that it also depends what the culture is, right?
Exactly. But there'll be times where you'll be called for a consult, for example, and you tell the intern from the trauma pit, please, will you do this, this, and this before I get to the consult? And if they do it and they do it amicably, the whole interaction is very smooth. Sometimes there can be a bit of hesitancy from one department to the next, but that's a normal thing, and it's just general team dynamics. But usually, if you're doing things as a junior, being the junior, it's nothing to be sad about. I mean, patients need to be worked up regardless
100%.
of the situation.
Yeah.
And even though you may have to run around and beg for a scan, it's something that will end up being done because at the end of the day, you're there for the patient. But I think the satisfaction comes in being able, or being that call that someone will call for help. I remember one of the consultants in Gen Peds called me for what they thought was an appendicitis, and I came and assessed the patient, reviewed the bloods, and then determined it wasn't. And I remember specifically 2 years ago they shouted me for doing something very silly. not running a gas properly or something. And then I had to tell them, that consultant, it wasn't appendicitis, and they were so grateful. They're like, thank you so much for excluding this for me. I was like, but last year you were shouting at me. It was quite a fun dynamic to turn around. And I think that's the beauty of stepping away from internship into a more responsible role.
Sure.
Is that part of that maturing is that realizing the responsibility is on you.
Yes.
And that the decisions you make may not be, you hope they'd be backed by the department or that you be supported, but if you make a decision and something bad happens, that's on you.
Yeah.
And that's the responsibility you have as a doctor, is that decisions that you make really can affect people's lives. And you always, or you should have support from your senior, from your department, from your hospital. But really, like, if your name is on the paper, you have signed and you have done things that you are responsible for. It's not a joke. It comes with real weight and
There's
real
gravitas,
responsibility.
yeah.
Exactly.
I'm so glad you had that interaction, but it was only possible because you had the previous interaction during internship. You had to go through internship in order to reach that place where you had the experience, the clinical acumen, to be able to say, this is definitely not an appendicitis. I think I diverted you and derailed you a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It was a great little rabbit hole that we went down. So I'll take you back again to the whole process of applying for internship. For
ComServe, yes.
Community service. I keep on saying internship. I'm so sorry.
Internship plus.
I'm demoting you.
No, don't worry about that. So going back to our discussion earlier about being sort of geared towards something. If you have an idea of what you want to pursue and you say you're dead set on internal medicine and you don't have any responsibilities like a house or a wife or kids or a husband or a partner or whatever it is, and you are free to move, then ComServe can be a wonderful year for you.
Sure.
It can be something that expands your career. It can be something that guides you into your future.
Why do you say if you don't have those commitments, what role does that play?
So you have to consider, like, if you have kids.
Sure.
And I'm sure you don't want to be placed in the heart of rural Limpopo and have to leave your kids.
I don't know, Naeem. It has its appeal. So, I've often joked with Kwame, if I get posted for community service, just 3 hours drive away from Joburg.
Your kids will miss you dearly. You may be a bit more sane, but your kids will miss you dearly. But regardless, so if you have property that you have to pay for, etc., there's a host of things you have to take into account. And if you have to move, you have to move, right? Which is the risk you take in doing community service. It's one of the things that you have to be aware of is that you may be placed somewhere else and you may have to make a year of personal sacrifice. And I'll tell you, so I initially didn't intend on applying to Baragwanath, but I'll get to that part just now. There's a list of different hospitals that gets released in a circular that offer community service posts, and they're quite rural. Some of them are on the adjunct of or on the periphery level 2 hospitals, and then some are in urban areas like Baragwanath and Joburg, and all offer different things. So there are breakdowns of what specific hospitals offer.
Will offer. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So we had a wonderful class rep who stayed sort of as our intern rep during our time at Baragwanath. If you want to interview someone, he's the guy, Shiraz Haripasa. Amazing. And he really helped us throughout our time as a student and as an intern. I think he released the list for us. So when we were applying, we were able to see which hospitals offered specific things. He was always in the loop, always communicating with us. So we had a Shiraz. So Shiraz is amazing. But
so everyone must find their Shiraz.
Yeah. Otherwise, we also had Jean from internal medicine at Bara.
Jean Johnston, yeah.
Yeah,
everyone knows Jean.
Wonderful. Jean is amazing. So she would also help us and send out these circulars and tell us how to apply, etc. So I might be a bit rusty in my exact details here.
Okay.
But you can only apply for one major metro. So you can only apply for, say, Baragwanath.
That's identical to the internship program where you can either choose Charlotte or Bara, but not both.
Yes. So you can only make one major metro choice. So you can't say, I want to apply to Joburg Gen and Grooteskuur. You have to apply to one major metro, or you don't have to apply, but only one is allowed. So it's not like I can apply to Joburg Gen here or Tygerberg for internship, for example. I think you have to put down 3 rural choices, priority 3s. So like your level 3 hospitals, or level 1 hospitals. Sorry. Then you can apply for 2 level 2 hospitals, and then 1 only. Level 1 or level 3.
Oh, level 3. Sorry.
Yeah, tertiary.
We keep on getting mixed around.
Yeah. Tertiary or quaternary hospital. And then, so it limits your options. It's not like internship where you can say, if I don't get my place here in Joburg, maybe I can end up in Tygerberg. It's a bit more limited. And it's because those communities actually need doctors. So my choice in Baragwanath and why I chose Bara was made on the last day of the window of application. And that's a good word, window of application. So I initially applied to Edenvale, and I wanted to do 6 months of internal med and 6 months of anesthetics, if I was lucky enough to get it. And on the actual ICSP website, you can see the number of people who've applied to that specific hospital or that specific institution or clinic or whatever it is. And for the 12 or 16 posts available, there were 70-something applicants.
At Edenvale?
At Edenvale. So I said, okay, well, Edenvale looks quite saturated. My chances are 1 in 7. It might not be good for me. Let me check something like Telemokarane, which also offered some surgical time and some anesthetics time, or medicine and anesthetics time. So I thought that initially I would do. And when I applied, or when I changed my application, there was 60 applicants and 8 posts or something like that. And then I went back to lonely Baragwanath and I saw 8 posts and 14 applicants.
Wow.
So my reason for staying in Gauteng is, I don't think it's noble at all, don't get me wrong. But I got married and I had quite a few things that tied me down to Gauteng. My wife's aunt had just adopted a child and we were sort of looking after the kid, or not me particularly, but she's a single mom. Her husband passed away during COVID, and I think we just needed to support her, and we needed the family with us as well during this time. It was a big transition for my wife and her family, so I needed to stay in Gauteng for those reasons. Before, I thought I would go to maybe Klerksdorp to do internal medicine or something along those lines, but I knew that at Baragwanath I could do some internal medicine time. I knew I'd definitely do pizza and definitely do obs and gynae, but I was sort of fine and I resigned myself with that. And then we applied, I bit the bullet. I thought if I get it, I'll get it. If I don't, well, I'm a religious man, that's in God's hands. So I just sort of went with that. But I knew that I tried to play a statistics game. And I think that if you're going to apply, you should also try to bear that in mind, is that you are taking a risk, but as doctors, you should know that all risks should be calculated. Yes. And I weighed,
what's the risk and benefit ratio?
Exactly, the risk and benefit ratio. So I looked at my risks and I looked at applying to somewhere like Tele or Joburg Gen was an option too, or Edenvale. And then I looked around the areas, and then I looked at things that were not too far from Gauteng that I'd be able to make travel arrangements. I can't actually remember my exact application layout, but I remember that the furthest place was in the Western Cape, and I thought that if my wife has to pack up and we move to the Cape Town, or we move to the Western Cape, to Paarl or whatever, we'll be able to make that sacrifice. But if we need to stay in Gauteng for the family and for our reasons and staying in a new place and just being married, we'll be able to travel maybe an hour, 45 minutes. So it was just at the border of Mpumalanga and Gauteng, somewhere in the south of Gauteng, or just at the very near. So bordering places and places that had good weight. And then also, I'd hate to say it, but you also have to play games of exclusion. So to also apply at level 2 places that are saturated, so that you might not get those places.
So you don't get put there.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to say, but if you are going to apply, you have to apply smart. So places like Leratong, if you apply to Joburg Gen, for example, you can apply to one province 3 times and 3 different levels. So I chose Baragwanath, Leratong, and somewhere else. And
Leratong is super saturated.
Saturated.
Everyone puts it as like their second or third choice if they want to get there first.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were 150 applicants.
For like 8 places.
Exactly. So I thought, listen, I know I'm part of the problem, but this is one of the things that I sort of try to, in working out that calculated risk, to make that first choice as best as possible and to make it as favorable in my chances as possible. So it's about weighing up those risks, weighing up what you want from the year, and weighing up how likely you are to get that.
Sure.
But try to apply to places where you can get exposure into things, or get as much exposure to further your career as possible. Because you can be placed in a tertiary hospital and then advance your career quite nicely. Or you can be placed in a secondary institution where you do a whole year of anesthetics, but there's no consultant cover, and you might not be able to use that time. Though you might be able to create your own logbook and provide evidence of all the cases you've done, for example, in anesthetics, it might not actually weigh anything in terms of your career.
So if I understand correct, it does seem like the ICSP website, the actual process of applying, is pretty similar.
Yes.
With the exception that internship is a structured program where you're going to go through 3 months rotations in first year, and in second year you're going to go through a different rotation. So it pretty much that course is charted out for you. Whereas with community service, you're choosing a site because of exposure, and you know that certain things are going to be better than others in those sites. Now, as you were speaking, you mentioned not having particularly noble motives. I think that it's absolutely fine to have different life stages. You have some people with children, some people with special needs. They might have health concerns, or other things going on that means that they can't go out to certain sites, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's particularly bad if you say like, oh, I wanted to choose a certain site for me. However, we're talking about community service. Mm-hmm. How much do you think is actually weighing on your mind as you're serving as a community service doctor? Do you feel like you are helping South Africa be better? I mean, you're getting paid for a job, right? And you're getting paid more than internship. Mm-hmm. So do you think that it is right to call it community service?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question.
Like, if you leave early, are you feeling guilty because this should be your charitable community service donation to society?
Yeah. When you put it that way, I actually haven't thought about the moral ramifications and the name community service, what weight it bears. But I think that's an excellent point. I will say this though: this year has been much busier for me than my internship years.
Really?
Yeah. And I definitely think if we talk about serving communities, like the departments that we've worked in, especially departments like pediatric surgery, where you cater to a huge community.
Because it's specialized, your catchment area is bigger, right? You're getting more referrals than... Because there's cases that can't be managed at a clinic level.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
So we were getting like referrals from the Northwest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we had a huge catchment population.
Is there no ped surge in the Northwest at all? What's
remember
driving that pressure?
Yeah, I can't remember how exactly it worked, but I think there were instances where people from Klerksdorp were coming to us, and yes, I think there was a ped surge at.
Okay, well, Klerksdorp is just in the corner of Northwest. It's like it's almost Gauteng.
Yeah.
It's like pseudo Gauteng.
By technicality.
If you said like Tabazimbi, like somebody's coming from further deeper into the Northwest.
No, so I think like what would happen is that they'd be referred to an institution like maybe what's the Tinswalo Hospital?
Sure. That's it in Mpumalanga.
Yeah. And then from Tinswalo they'll be like sent to Rob Ferreira. Yes. And then from Rob Ferreira they'll be either referred to like Joburg Gen.
Yeah.
And then Joburg Gen was having their huge issues with their casualty. Yes. And then they were sent to Bara, for example.
Hectic.
So it was a whole chain of referrals that ended up in Bara being a big dump at that point.
Yes. So the essence is you're saying it is a community service here, because although you're getting paid more, you're working harder. And for some of the interns hearing that, they must be thinking, oh no, because they've worked pretty hard. Yes. Internship is no joke. It's hard work. You work 90-hour weeks. Mm-hmm. Now you come to community service and they're like,
But that depends where you go.
Okay.
So I do know, for example, like a few friends of ours, and the other thing that I forgot to mention is similarly to your internship application, you can also apply as a social compact, things like that. So they applied as a social compact and ended up, I'm not too sure if they're in Mafeking or somewhere in Mpumalanga, but I'm saying Mafeking because I might be confusing two groups of interns that have done the same thing of social compacting. However, I know that these two guys ended up in a hospital together, and they serve a great community. They're the only two doctors there doing, basically running the hospital, in terms of the doctor staff, not nursing, etc. So they are on call every second day, but they might not be called every night, and they might not be as physically exhausted in terms of patient load that someone might be, say for example, at Joburg Gen doing ped surgery or doing ENT in a sub-spec area.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to clarify, because what you're saying is that the weight and the responsibility on them is different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're in a big tertiary centre in Johannesburg, you're going to be managing 50 patients,
mm-hmm.
and you'll be tired and you'll be busy because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're out in rural, you might have 5 patients, but you'll be tired and you'll be busy because of something else. Because there's no one below and above you. You are it.
And the challenges are always different. I think the most notable thing is dealing with limited resources and limited options in terms of your treatment modality.
Yeah.
And though, for example, you might see as many organophosphates as you do in internship, when you have to deal with one with limited resources, it becomes immensely more stressful.
You open a drawer and there's only one little pile of atropine left.
You look at it and you go, wow, this is not going to be good.
Is there any way you can stretch that little 1 mil over?
I think that the foundation of that lesson is, or not necessarily the foundation, but a glimpse into that lesson can happen in your second year of internship when you do family medicine.
Okay.
And when you do family medicine, you might be placed in a clinic that's quite strapped for resources.
So family medicine is a good kind of warm up to community service?
I don't think it will always it'll be the exact taste of what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll get the exact situation because you might be somewhere completely different. But depending on where you go, like I went to Orange Farm to Stretford Clinic, and I remember seeing 3 stab chests, and we didn't have any ICDs. It was such a mission. And eventually we were able to make a plan for these patients, but I remember being so stressed that these guys weren't going to make it to Bara, phoning Dr. Jennings on call and asking her for advice. And then I remember in that same rotation going to Lane South, where someone had sent it was crazy, they sent a patient who had a stab chest on the patient transport, the Jika, to Lens South, and the guy needed to developed tension pneumo, and we had to it was such a mission, and we had to decompress him there.
Needle decompression.
On the bus, and then put in the ICD in our little small hospital, our district hospital, suture it in place, get it bubbling, and then send him to Baragwanath for a bed. It was immensely stressful, and this is the reality you might face in being in an institution like that, is that you might run out of tubing or needles, for example, and then have to wait for a while, and then the onus of being a clinician falls on you. I know I've heard of a few people who've driven on their weekend off to Discam and bought a bunch of needles so that they can give it. Yeah, so it's just making the most of that situation.
But you see, that is the essence of community service, right? Whether you're in a tertiary setting or you're out in the sticks, that doctor that drove to Discam and used their own money to get some needles, that was recognizing a need in the community and meeting it. As silly as an example as that is, the cost might have been 400 Rand for a couple dozen needles, or I don't know. The point is that the heart of that doctor was right. They wanted to make a difference. They knew that something simple like that would make a difference. And I think that as an intern, you need to start developing that eye that says, how can I make things better? I spoke about what a culture is, a culture grows.
Yes.
And also recognizing that you have the power to change small things. And if you see something that's wrong, say something or do something. Don't just accept that, this is the government's problem.
Yeah.
If you were working in a corporate job and there was no paper in the printer, you wouldn't go, oh, I'm sorry, I can't print the reports.
Yeah.
Your boss would say to you, Machana, go to CNA and buy some 80 gram per square meter paper and print the thing.
Exactly.
And we need to take that initiative as well as clinicians. You know, your job, I do recommend that when you're off, you're off. You know, you don't have work on your heart and your mind all the time. But there is a point where you say, it's a small trip to discount for me and my weekend off.
Correct.
You know, to make a difference.
Exactly.
We got into medicine to help people. You know, the old age question where they're like, okay, why do you want to be a doctor? Oh, I want to help people. It doesn't work in interviews, but it does in real life. You want to help people.
Yeah. I think when you realize that you are a person who's been given a great opportunity to help other people, and when you realize at its core humanity is an entire wonderful organism that's survived on social interaction. So we as humans have only made it this far because of other people. And when you realize that you're part of that and that you are able to help someone who's in desperate need, when you are able to give back that way, it's one of the most rewarding things. It's you're doing a human task here. It's not something to say, oh, I'm doing a clinical job and this is the risk. It's something that you have people who come from far and wide using their little bits of money that they have left, seeking help. And if you are able to give that to someone, that help, that's a wonderful thing to give. You can, as you said, you can change lives. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing to have. It's one of the motivating factors. In ped surgery, for example, that I keep going back to, it was such an impactful time for me in the beginning of the year.
Well, you said it shapes where you want to go. You were dead set on internal medicine at one point. Yeah. And then after doing ped surgery, you're like, no.
Yeah. The pizza, it was incredible. You wake up early in the morning, 5:30, and me, I'm not an early morning person. I'm a night owl, but it made me change my sleeping patterns and sleep earlier and wake up earlier. And I woke up excited to go to work, even if it was to see a 40% burns in ICU, small little 2-year-old kid. That to help that kid and to see that kid get weaned off the vent and to go home was, I think, the single most rewarding thing. Wow. And kids are wonderful because they are incredibly loving. They feel better and they have a smile on their face. I know you're a father. That feeling of helping a small child is a wonderful feeling. I think that was one of the big changes in my career, was doing ped surgery. It really put into perspective the power that you have to really help someone. And don't get me wrong, it's wonderful to help and to manage someone who has a chronic disease and to help them optimize their lives and see them lose weight and get better and really make an impactful change in their life, and they can live a long life. But to help someone at the foundation of their life and live a long life until their 60s.
And also with surgery, it's unique in the sense that, you know, if there's a problem, you fix it.
Yes.
You know, and you are responsible for fixing it. There's no like lifestyle modification.
Yeah.
There's no lifestyle modification for appendicitis. You go and you cut it out.
Well, I mean, there could be. But yeah, true. Like a foreign body in the leg. Yeah. You can remove that and suture it up and get the patient moving again. It's a wonderful thing. So it was very rewarding to actually see hands-on when you are able to take the patient to theatre, debride whatever wound there is. The patient leaves happy with a beautiful scar that doesn't look like they've been hurt. You can make a really good impact on that patient.
So if you were to review your junior doctor years, I mean, you're almost finished now with the mandatory 3 years of government service.
Yes.
And I'll ask you about where you see yourself going from here. But if you were to review your 3 years, I want you to rate your rotations that you've had.
Wow, okay.
But quick, like we don't need to go into excruciating detail about each. I want you to talk about each rotation that you had. Obviously, like, as you mentioned, it's unique to the individual. It's specific, but we'll go, because of the current system, it is very structured. We'll go through first year.
Yes.
Go through second year.
Sure.
Your best part and your worst part of every rotation.
Okay.
Okay, but I want you also to think generalized. Like, you know, you are uniquely Naeem.
Yes.
However, you do have a general sense of what people complained about, what people loved about, and what will stick to people when you think about the different rotations? So let's go.
Sure.
Internal medicine, internship first year, you started with internal medicine.
Internal medicine.
Out of 10.
About 8, actually.
Best part?
Letting people go home better than they came.
Worst part?
Having to certify over 10 patients a night on a ward call.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was tough.
Second rotation?
I did obs and gynae.
Okay. Out of 10?
For me as an intern, that was a strict 6. Maybe even less. Maybe like 4.
Oh, why not a 7?
I didn't like it.
Okay.
It was just too many bodily fluids. I wasn't comfortable enough as a doctor.
Sure.
I've always felt a bit panicky, especially with birthing the kids and all the problems that
Burning
come.
a kid?
Birthing.
Oh, birthing.
Birthing the kid.
I was like,
sorry.
how do you burn a
My
child
voice
during
is
birth?
good. Birthing the kid.
How
with a
close
TH.
was that lamp?
No, it wasn't my phone, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
But
So we said solid 6?
yeah,
Best
6.
part?
Doing Caesars. As you said, having your name on the Caesar form.
Yeah.
It's
It's quite satisfying, hey?
Very,
you
very
feel like
satisfying.
you've arrived, even though it took you 45 minutes to get there. To
Mind
close.
you, as a comserve, I will give it a bit higher than that.
Okay. Worst part?
Worst part of obs, the body fluids. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the smells.
I have to say as well.
Yeah.
Okay, third rotation of internship first year?
I did peds.
Out of 10?
9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As high as that. Why not 10?
NICU.
Okay.
Hectic.
So worst part was NICU.
Yes. Well, I mean, neonates is just generally tough. The kids are small. Some of them have quite bad outcomes, and those veins can humble you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine, imagine load shedding, 3 a.m. during your call, 850 gram and needs a drip.
Needs a drip. Oh yeah, that's tough.
Okay. So best part of peds.
The kids. That's what the best part.
Okay.
Having kids go home happy.
Then last rotation of internship is surgery.
I did surgery, particularly only trauma. That's all I did.
You did 3 months of trauma
Yeah.
at Bara. Okay, so maybe this might be a falsely high or falsely low, but out of 10?
But an 8.5.
Okay, best part?
Being hands-on and involved, doing procedures, resuscitating people successfully.
And worst part?
Oh, drunk people at 4 a.m. Hey, straight up. Drunk guys fighting with you. But as you said in your podcast, that's just the hospital is an extreme
small
environment.
microcosm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're seeing people at their worst, injured, and who are really in desperate need of help.
Okay.
But really being able to help someone on death's door,
Sure.
and seeing a young healthy patient shot 8 times in the stomach walk
Wow.
home, wonderful feeling.
So I noticed that even your worst rotation was still a pass. 6 out of 10.
Listen, I'm very confused. That's why I can't make a clear-cut decision.
Okay.
I've loved everything I've done.
Yes.
And even if I hated it, like as an intern, I remember telling Prof. Adam and Puvi Naidu, Dr. Naidu, that I will never come back to ops. And then they saw me again this year, and they were like, "But you said you're not coming back."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I'm here, and I'm going to make the most of it."
Sure.
And now that I'm here, I have no qualms. I actually quite enjoy ops.
So first year of internship was a success. Did it make you a better doctor?
I hope so.
I
think so.
I like that. You have the humility. I'm sure it did. Your seniors love you. Those who've worked with you love you. Your second year of internship.
Well, we'll find out in the comments.
The second year of internship started with.
I started with family med.
Oh wow!
Yes.
And that's the 6 months.
The 6 month. So
Okay.
we were the first group to have the 6 months of
Okay.
family med. I did my time at Stretford CHC in Orange Farm, and I did a month of district time at Len South, and then I did a month of MEU time, casualty at Bara.
Okay.
Yeah.
So out of 10.
Well, I got married. It was disproportionately good.
Okay.
But I think family med was good. I'd give it a 7.5
Okay.
in the district. I think the best parts were seeing patients, following up, having that interaction daily.
Mhm.
That was wonderful.
Mhm.
The worst part is probably the resource limitation,
Mhm.
dealing with things that you aren't comfortable with,
Mhm.
and seeing acute patients that you can't actually make an intervention, like no blood gases, etc. Your options are limited.
There are very few clinical signs for hyperkalemia, But did you have to kind of rely more on your clinical science?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, we had no blood gas machines. You know that we had an iStat machine, and the cartridges all expired, so we couldn't use them. And we had a patient who came in acutely delirious. Actually, he was unconscious, and we were about to tube the guy. We assessed him as a GCS 8. And before we tubed him, I was like, we had an HGT, obviously, that wasn't working. We ran out of strips.
Yes.
I was like, let's put up a dextrose infusion first.
And just see what happens.
Woke up.
Wow.
Woke up 10 minutes later, was like, whoa, he was diabetic.
Huh.
No one knew his story. He didn't have any signs on him. I know that may not be the first step, but I don't know why we thought he was a diabetic. I think he had like other clinical stigma. He had yes, he did. He had
acanthosis nigricans.
Exactly, and he had skin tags and a few other signs. So we thought, listen, he might be hypoglycemic, and we just started him off with that. Those are like the clinical signs.
I mean, that's basics. You know, your reversible
Exactly.
H's and T's, and yeah. So
exactly.
So I think, like you're saying, it comes down to clinical acumen, and that only gets honed in the fires of not having resources. I've actually had conversations with doctors where I've said, why are we doing a gas on this person? Before we do the gas, why are we doing the gas? Because it's so easy to be like, oh, just do a gas.
Yeah.
But then you're chasing numbers.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes patients stay in hospital for far too long because we're chasing numbers. Oh, we just need to get the sodium to above 135. I'm like, but it's 132. It's almost there.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing. And especially, I think, in a clinical setting where you have access, you can over-investigate.
Yes.
Things that you might notice incidentally on a scan might become a huge thing. Those are small minorities.
And where more people are rotating through, and so you're seeing the different doctors are seeing different patients every day, and they're hesitant to discharge because they don't know what the patient's baseline is.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas if you're in family medicine, like you say, you've seen somebody for a while.
Yes.
And now you know, okay, no, fit for discharge.
Also, I think one of the frustrating things in family medicine is that you'll see a lady who comes in with a BMI of 130, who's on every agent.
A BMI of 130.
No, sorry.
Wow.
Oh, sorry.
Did she get dropped off by helicopter?
No, that would be terrible. A weight of 130 and a BMI of, let's say,
45 or 50,
yeah. Wow. And then they're on metabolic syndrome on every agent, and you ask them about their exercise, and they tell you that they walk to work, which might be fine in terms of a base exercise if you're a healthy patient.
Yeah.
But then we keep adding pharmacotherapy to something that needs bigger intervention. I think that's a part that we don't see as clinicians, is what happens at home. Obviously, you can't be with the patient at home and things like that.
Look, even on the posters on the side of the hospital wall that say a patient's rights and responsibilities, there's a limit to how much we have to do. And there's some things where you say, right, now this is your life.
Your life, exactly.
And I'm going to use the resources, the very limited resources we have to look after somebody else now.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think what makes it frustrating is that if you look at the Latin of what doctor is,
teach?
Is to teach.
Doceria.
Doctores, yeah. Or was it
Doceria? I think it's doceria. I stand to be corrected.
I don't know either.
Docere. I didn't do Latin at high school.
Neither did I.
Past grade 9.
Okay, you actually did it. So you're probably more attuned than I am.
All I remember is amor, amasa, mata, mama, samata, samat. That's in conjugations. I love, you love, he loves, we love, they love. I think it's something like that. Yeah, but it's all amor, amasa, mata, mama,
I went to St. John's and didn't do Latin, but all I know is Lux Vita Caritas.
Because you went to a bad school. I went to King Edwards.
Look at us. Far down the line out of high school.
We have gone far down the line because we were talking about second year
internship
rotations. So family med, we said, was 7.5.
Yeah, 7.
And then your second rotation of second year internship?
Well, I'll say 7.5, but MEU I'll give a good 9.
Okay.
MEU was excellent. It was also something that the team, it had a great foundation in terms of teams. You had shifts, got to do amazing interventions, acute stuff. I remember there was a young stroke that came on my patient within a thrombolysis window, and I was able to thrombolyze the patient with Actilans. I actually kept the vial. I asked the prof if I could keep it because I was very happy, and the the patient went home with very little neurological stigmata.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that was a wonderful thing to do.
Okay.
And to see and manage acute MIs under guidance, and the teams were amazing. I just loved MEU time.
So, second rotation of second year internship. What did you do?
So then the second half of the year, you have to do the 3 rotations. I did, in order, I did orthos, anesthetics, and then I did psych.
Okay, so let's go. Orthos?
About an 8.
Okay.
Loved orthos.
Okay.
But I wish I had more theatre time. Best part of orthos, getting to be in casualty, acutely managing any issues, doing the clinical
Did
diagnosis.
you reduce a lot of fractures?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And I got taught quite well. So I love putting in the pops, putting people in casts. Even though we had a pop technician.
Okay. For the benefits of the medical students, a pop is a plaster of Paris.
Plaster of Paris.
We actually need to do a podcast about what ATLS, ACLS, and all of those stand for, because people say, we rattle off these
our
abbreviations
medical abbreviations.
And people are like, what is that?
Well, talk about just quick story about medical abbreviations. In obstetrics, we have fetal anomaly scan, which is a FAS scan.
Yes.
And the anaesthetist asked me, we had a lady coming for an elective surgery. She was an AMA, which stands for Advanced Maternal Age.
Yes.
With a normal OGTT, which is an oral glucose tolerance test, and an uncertain FAS.
Yes.
Uncertain because it wasn't done and the patient reported. Sure. So the anaesthetist asked me to call pediatrics because of the FAS.
They were expecting fetal alcohol syndrome.
Exactly.
Shame. I think that's what happens when you are exposed to your narrow little sliver of medicine, right? I mean,
exactly.
When you're specializing in something, and then there's always new abbreviations, and sometimes it's even site specific.
Yes.
So as an intern, you learn this lingo, and you kind of have to help everyone to know everyone else's lingo, because you are moving between the different departments. Correct. Right? Okay, so ortho's best part was being in trauma and reducing those fractures and all of that. What was the worst part of ortho's?
Probably septic feet.
Yeah, orthos. Oh, of course, because you would have
septic hands. And mind you, I was in the hands unit. We had a lot of flexor tenosynovitis, etc. So we would see quite a lot of awful hands, and amputations. Those traumatic amputations. I think that was the worst part of orthos.
Sure.
Not being able to salvage limbs, etc. But I think the best part is giving people mobility back. Wonderful feeling. Okay.
Then you did anesthetics.
Anesthetics. Mind you, I thought I would do anesthetics for the longest time.
Yes, you did say that. So it was either internal med or anesthetics. Yeah.
As someone, I don't know who, I think one of the anaesthetists said both medicine and anesthetics are quite type A personality things. Okay. I don't know if I'm quite type A, but definitely in the realm of being a perfectionist, or at least pseudo-perfectionist. But yeah, anesthetics was one of the things I wanted to do. And I love the technical part of it. I love the physiology part of it. I love being involved and getting very hands-on with tubes and LMAs, and so I loved it. It was probably one of my better rotations as an intern. I think 9, maybe even 10. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
You realize if you make it a 10, you trumping peds and you're making it your best rotation.
Yeah. No, okay. It was wonderful. I loved anesthetics. I even volunteered to be the rep in anesthetics. Okay. But I think the worst part. So the best part of anesthetics was successful GAs, successful tubes, running a theatre by yourself. That was wonderful. When we were confident enough in obs theatre, that was in our second month. My friend Nishal was my clinical partner, but we were paired up together during our time in anesthetics. He ran one theatre, I ran the other theatre, and the seniors got to study. It was just something that we sort of agreed upon, but I mean, they came to check up on us.
Of course. No, there's always supervision. Anesthetics is one of those things where even internationally, you cannot do it on your own. Yeah.
No, so like the senior was with us in theatre. I put in the spinal, I monitored, I gave the phenol when needed, etc. Sure. When the tube needed to be put in, we agreed. Yeah. He supervised.
And for medical legal reasons, you weren't running a theatre for 4 hours on your own unsupervised. It was like for 30 minutes they said, I'm going to quickly go and get my textbook and come back.
No, it was just like doing the cases confidently yourself without any intervention from the senior.
Okay, worst parts of anesthetics.
Pre-meds. Pre-meds are that you would finish your normal day and a long theatre day at like say 4 or 5 o'clock, and then you'd have to go see pre-meds, and some patients weren't optimized or whatever. Sure. And maybe that's just the surgeon's issue. So, but pre-meds is probably the worst part of it all.
Okay, last rotation of second year internship.
Psych, 7.
As much as that.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
lower, but I'd say 7.
What was the best part of psych?
This is gonna sound weird, but the calls.
Okay.
Bara, the calls were great. We did quite a few calls, like I think 4 in total
Over the whole of
over the 2 months.
Wow.
We had a very saturated intern group. We had
Yes.
like too many numbers,
Okay.
so there were just too many people on call.
And when you were on call, was it as enjoyable as you make it out to
You know,
be?
very
calls.
very little patients. It was quite nice.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because all of them are in the trauma pit and
yeah.
medical.
So they have to
nurses.
get cleared medically first.
Yes.
So I think in my 4 calls that I did at Bara, I admitted 2 patients.
Wow. Okay.
And there's a lot of psych patients,
Okay.
mind you.
Yes.
So during the day, especially
maybe lots of psych consults then.
yeah, there were quite a few psych consults.
Okay.
But during the day, we'd have more of our actual admissions when all of the workup was done. The medical causes of psychosis or delirium were excluded. Then we were able to effectively manage. The worst part of psych for me is the prolonged stay of the patients.
Mhm.
And I know that's the nature of psychiatry. It's not something we can change, but you know, you get used to an acute and a fast pace of patient turnover and dealing with problems. But some of these patients' problems are very long in foundation. They take years to develop and years to overcome. So you'd see them for like a whole month or 2 months, and they don't get better or don't budge in their prognosis, and then they do make progress. Don't get me wrong. I'll change that. The best part of it was probably doing the community psych part of it all, where we went to the clinics for a week and joined a registrar and saw patients that were discharged from the hospital who were doing very well and
Okay.
functioning better.
Yes.
That was wonderful to see.
So it's clear that, because a consistent thread that comes through as you're rating all of these rotations, it's clear that for you, one of the things that stands out the most is seeing patients do well.
Patient outcomes, that's my
Yeah.
favorite thing.
That's the most rewarding part
Yeah.
of these various rotations.
Yeah.
So in comparison to your internship years, how would you rate community service? You did say it's busier.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things for me, as I look at the HPCSA logbook requirements for internship, is that it asks you, in every rotation, it asks you, how much time did you spend studying?
Yes.
And for me, that's actually hilarious because there's almost no time to study.
Exactly.
I mean, you're working 90-hour weeks
Mhm.
as an intern. Like, how are you supposed to pick up a book at the end of the day?
Exactly.
But you learn a lot. I would say, like, you're learning for 60 of those 90 hours
Mhm.
because you're learning on the job, right?
Exactly.
How are you learning and studying in community service? Maybe you can just mention if you've done any of the courses,
Mhm.
when you did them, why you did them there.
Sure. So, to put it very bluntly, I haven't done my courses yet. I had to suspend a few of my courses for personal reason. So, in the beginning of the year, my best friend passed away, and I had all my courses booked during that time, and I sort of wasn't in the right mental space to actually sit down and study.
Take on an extra responsibility. Yeah.
And he was a ComServe.
Studying's hard work, man.
It is hard work. And he was a ComServe, and he was very motivated to study. So it's sort of through me. But I have rebooked my courses, and ATLS unfortunately has been booked for next year. But BLS, ACLS is all within the next few months.
Yeah.
And PALS as well. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. But those are booked. And I was able to meet some very wonderful colleagues who are doing their primaries who did their primaries in, say, obstetrics, and their partner did his primaries in Gen Surg, and they were able to share their resources with me. So I have my
Study notes for those primaries.
exactly for the primaries
When do you want to do your primaries for those?
in the New Year circuit.
Okay.
So I want to do my Gen Surg primaries in the New Year circuit. The studying has started. It's a bit slow. I am.
What's it like trying to get going again, having done 6 years of medical school and then?
So I will tell you this: I wasn't a huge fan of studying, for many reasons. I found it difficult to sit down and digest the material, especially without knowing things. I think my biggest frustration in studying was that I couldn't really put name to face with anything. So I was able to see these long pathways and, memorize them for the exam, and then they sort of go out of your head. And the best part of studying now is that you're able to say, oh, hey, I've seen this before. And with this clinical acumen you've established over the last 3 years, put that and synthesize that with the knowledge you're reading. It's a bit terrifying because you realize you've been doing a few things wrong, but I mean, luckily the outcomes aren't bad. But that you could be doing things better. But the wonderful thing is that with clinical knowledge and with coming back to study, that synthesis of knowledge becomes much easier to understand. So, like reading through the obstetrics protocol book, now having done many Caesars or many tocolysis for people going to Caesars or whatever the reason is, that becomes so much easier, and that becomes so much more second nature, where the studying becomes very relevant to your life. So even though you might not be seeing the zones of the neck in obstetrics, but you know what has or why specific things go specific places, or in ICU where your lines go, having that knowledge and that synthesis of that knowledge of the clinical stuff becomes much easier to study and much more rewarding. You go to work the next day very happy. And I'm also glad to be in an academic setting where we have ongoing teaching, and where the consultant would say, please read up on this and let's discuss this the next time we're on a round, and then go through that. So the studying becomes a bit easier when you need to start applying it practically.
Coming to the end of your 3 years of mandatory government service,
Sure.
if you were to cast your mind back to what it was like being a newly minted doctor coming out of medical school, newly qualified, with a certain worldview, a certain belief system about how medicine is, how medicine should be, how do you think you've changed through working as an intern and through community service, not necessarily at Bara, but just in general? How have you changed, and what would you say to somebody who's a newly qualified doctor to kind of caution against or guard them? Like, how can somebody benefit from your 3 years of experience so that they don't have to learn the hard way, is what I'm trying to get at.
That's interesting. I think when you start your career, especially in medicine, and going back to your podcast that you released this morning, or for those who don't know, this is the 3rd of September. Is it the 3rd?
The 3rd of September.
The 3rd of September.
So you could talk about episode 10. This is going to be episode 11, by the way.
Sure.
People
so
won't
going
have
back
to
to
go too far
episode
back.
10, you spoke about interns not knowing what they know, and the 4 stages of knowledge. I think it's wonderful that you mentioned that, because it's one of my favorite effects of knowledge, the Dunning-Kruger effect, of going in with this expectation that you know so much, but when you realize your boundaries, that's when or your limitations, that's when you really can sort of take off and grow.
So on that curve, the Dunning-Kruger effect speaks about when you have a little bit of knowledge, you have a peak of confidence because you know a little bit, and you know more than a layman.
Exactly.
So you're like, I know acid-base balance, and I know how to start an adrenaline infusion,
Yes.
I know how to read a blood gas. Then when you get exposed to the clinical setting, and when people are asking you tough clinical questions about that blood gas, you realize, I don't know as much as I thought.
The valley of despair.
Yes. Or the slough of despond, as
Yes.
Pilgrim's Progress puts it. Then there's a slow, gradual return to a peak when you are a professor or a consultant. If you were to look at that graph, where would you put yourself now?
So, I think I'm in that lovely valley.
Oh, really?
Yes.
As low as that?
So
because your knowledge is exponentially increased.
It's not to say that I fear that I don't know things. It's not that. Like, I'm very happy to manage a patient and take a patient on from starting point to end point now. But I think it's to say that there's so much more to learn, and so much more that I don't know, can't, or haven't grasped yet. And that the world of medicine, and especially as a junior doctor, the operative word there is junior, is that it's only up from here. And I think what it is, I started off quite, I wouldn't say confident, but I think quite excited about it. And the excitement hasn't changed. But I think what definitely has changed is the confidence in, firstly, my clinical skills, but also managing patients, but also the confidence of helping people.
Yeah.
That even though you may not be able to help someone walk out of the hospital if they've had a stroke, or if they've had an amputation, for example, it's the confidence that you can give some hope that the end is not here. And even going through something like death, that it's not, unfortunately, I mean, death is final, but that it's not That is part of your career, you know.
If I can finish your sentence for you, and I see where you're going, is that sometimes your good that you do is not always curative, but it's to hold somebody for long enough that the family can say goodbye, or it's to give them a few months so that they can make it to their daughter's wedding, you know, that kind of thing. 100%. I love what you've put there, and using the 4 phases of knowledge, because in the beginning we don't know what we don't know. We come into our junior years, we've been exposed to some as a medical student. You know, my very first episode was with an ENT specialist, and he was saying it's actually quite laughable that our exposure to ENT is like 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
You know,
2 weeks.
And then if you were to say to somebody, do you want to be an ENT?
Yeah.
They've got a 2-week kind of exposure to go on, you know.
Or radiologist, there's no exposure there.
100%. Your exposure to radiology as a medical student is just studying the actual files.
Yeah. Or it's dealing with booking scans, and sometimes it's quite difficult.
Okay, so we have spoken a lot about the process of being a junior doctor, and thank you so much for unpacking it and also sharing from your personal experience. I want a little bit more of Naeem to come through on this podcast.
Sure.
My endearing memory of you is as the intern with incredible penmanship and with beautiful pens. In fact, to the point where if the nurses were saying, "Where's that doctor with the fountain pens?"
Yeah,
it meant you. So for the audience who don't know you, when we first met you, you were always a snappy dresser, always an incredibly well put together young doctor, looking very smart on the wards, and you had these. I want to say Mont Blanc, but like really expensive, beautiful looking pens.
They weren't that expensive. As you said in episode 10, you don't want to put a target on your back. So, well, thank you. It's also, I think, in part, many things. It's one, the belief of being professional, the appearing professional in your behavior and in your dress, and also to be unique in yourself. So I started collecting fountain pens in high school, and I've actually never taken my Mont Blanc to work. I refuse to. If anything happens to it, I think I'll die. But I am very fond of my pens. So as a doctor, we are quite unique in our position, especially in government, where we have to use pen and paper. That your pen is your ultimate tool. Yeah. You use it more than your stethoscope.
That's true.
So I had a real issue, and I think the issue stemmed, if my friend Nishal's going to listen to this episode from him, I would hate to read his notes. It's impossible. I would not be able to read anything. And that's what your patient notes are. It's not, your patient doesn't read their notes, or hardly ever will read their notes. It's a record for you as a medical professional to see what's happening day to day with the patient, but it's also your ultimate communication tool between other doctors. Your clerking notes should be
impeccable. They must be.
So clear that any layperson from a first year intern or fifth year medical student should be able to read your notes and see what's happened with the patient.
Agreed.
And so like things like saying history as above, this shouldn't necessarily happen. I think a better approach is the SOAP method, or subjective, objective, assessment and plan, where you can build upon your previous history. And yes, you can say history is noted if the patient is a long stayer and you want to...
Or if it's written above on the same page.
Yes, or if it's commenting on the demographics, for example, or if it's on the same page for a review.
Yes.
Like if you've seen the patient in the morning and you want to review in the afternoon in a PM round. But that's where it started. So my handwriting was never great at all. Throughout, my father would always joke that I had doctor's handwriting from the time of primary school. And
isn't it so funny that you're saying how important our handwriting is, and yet the standing joke in society is that our handwriting is awful?
Exactly. So when I was in internship, now you talked about getting money and getting access to things. So I bought a few more fountain pens, and I had cheap ones that I bought online from Amazon that were $100, and I used them throughout my time in varsity and throughout my time as a medical student. And then I bought a few nicer ones that were a few more hundreds and rands, nothing too exorbitant. But what really happened is that I dropped one of my pens one of the days, and I broke the nib. And being tenacious and not wanting to pay for anything else, I decided that I'm going to try and fix it. I've seen flat nibbed fountain pens before, and I thought, listen, maybe I could make it flat nibbed and it'll write like a calligraphy stub or something along those lines. Ended up working. I ended up polishing it with some wet sandpaper, and it wrote perfectly fine. And then from my time as an intern, I started improving my handwriting, getting it to be a bit more calligraphic, if I can put it that way.
Even the way you said it, calligraphic versus calligraphic.
Oh,
calligraphic, yeah. I love that.
Oh, wow. And that's sort of how it went. And I ended up playing around more with my fountain pens, and you'd be surprised how many doctors use them, especially in surgery. I don't know, maybe it's a surgical thing, but throughout the board, it's a wonderful tool. You're writing all day. You don't have to apply pressure. There's a wide variety of inks. I know it sounds very nerdy to talk about fountain pens, but I really got into it.
You do realize you're on a podcast for medical students and doctors. Nerd is got to be in there somewhere.
Get a fountain pen.
We're all nerds about something.
Yeah, and I mean it goes quite hand in hand with what I was saying about using my hands. I've always loved doing that, making things, tinkering with things. When I was a medical student, I picked up playing the saxophone.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, I wish I practiced a bit more. I can play.
Imagine how you'd be able to serenade your wife now if you had continued with saxophone.
Oh yeah, no, and I mean serenade not so much, but I'd play a good tune, I think. But it was that. Then I got into being a barista and doing my coffee things.
Yes, you are the original Dr. Coffee.
Thank you. I'll take it.
No, your Instagram feed is immaculate. Your works of art and your latte art is great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just lots of practice and being tenacious. And then as a student, I was collecting records, like vinyl records. And I think it's that analog thing, using your hands, putting pen to paper. So now, I mean, I can't get away with writing rubbish. People know my clerks because of I don't use a thin line. You'll know my hand. I write in big, bold, black ink that is unmissable. And so if I write anything silly, you will know that I've written something silly. Yeah. So I try to always be cognizant of that, is that I'm communicating with, firstly, myself. I need to see what I've said, if it makes sense, and then I have to see if other people can read it and take it from there.
That's very good, because you what's coming across, even throughout this podcast, is how much you value people. And,
thank you.
And that's why you write the way you do, because the small expense in terms of the effort you make in your notes, time-wise or pen-wise or skill-wise, is looking after people at the end of the day. You know, your referrals are better, your consults are better, your histories are better.
I would hope so. The thing is that it's the small things you do that, and Dr. Patel Nirav would continuously give me advice about signaling. So as an intern, you all have the same foundation. You all have been through the same training. You've all done your mandatory requirements for the HPCSA. But there's a few things that can separate you as a professional from your colleagues who have the same experience. And signaling can come in many ways. It can come in leadership. It can come in actual work that you've done, your courses, your professional decoration, or your professional insight and I don't know I'm losing the word, but it's what you've done in your career, your experience. Oh my word, I can't believe I forgot the word. So things like doing your courses, ATLS, publishing research, etc. Yes. But it's also the way you carry yourself. Yeah. And that may come through in an interview only, for example, or it might come through in a letter of recommendation. And that's how you can signal to your future employer that you are of value, that you can add to the team. Now, I'm not saying that my big calligraphic notes will add much value to a team, but it will definitely be of assistance in clear communication, which is a huge foundation in a team effort, is to communicate clearly.
Yes.
So all of these things, whether you're doing calligraphy or you're doing coffee making, whatever, there's an element that will play part in your path, and it's just to figure out what it is that makes you you and allow you to walk a unique path.
That's a wonderful place to end off on this podcast interview. I want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for the invitation into your home. You are an incredible human being. You are a wonderful doctor, and I'm grateful for the input that you've put into this podcast. It's wonderful to hear from you and from your experience. I think that there's a uniquely Naeem stamp on this episode, so thank you.
Thank you, Simon. It was an honor to be a part of your podcast.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Dr. Naeem Vallee. From next week's episode, we'll be making a return to our usual Coffee with Consultants feature. If you know of a consultant or a senior registrar in a specialty that you would like featured on the Dr. Coffee podcast, please get in touch. The podcast's email address is drcoffeeza@gmail.com. That's drcoffeeza with no punctuation marks. We're also on Instagram and YouTube with the username @drcoffeeza. If you've got anything else on your mind, such as a request for additional topics, further information on how to engage with our guests, feedback on the show, or anything else, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again to the sponsors of this week's episode, FlashMed and WardWorks app. You can find links to their social media pages and websites in the show notes for this episode. The Dr. Coffee podcast is brand new and freshly brewed each week with you in mind. Please consider sharing this episode with fellow junior doctors and medical students in your world who you think would benefit from the content and enjoy it. You can also help by posting a picture of your favorite warming beverage on Instagram with the hashtag #HowsItBrew, that's brew with an EW at the end, and mentioning @DrCoffeeZA. We'll repost every mention to our story. Thank you so much for your support.